Welcome to the Shift Your Story, Change Your Life podcast. I'm Allie Rose, certified clinical hypnotherapist and subconscious success coach. I help my clients stop self-sabotage and feel safe to create more wealth, worth, and wellness from within. If you find yourself stuck repeating the same unhelpful patterns in your life, health, business, or relationships, even after all the mindset work, this podcast is for you. Each week, you'll hear deep dives into the hidden beliefs shaping your life and live hypno coaching sessions where someone shifts a block in real time. Because willpower isn't the problem, your subconscious story is. And when you shift it at the root, everything else begins to change. So let's dive in. Hello. Welcome back to the Shift Your Story, Change Your Life podcast. Today's episode is a little different, and I'm really looking forward to it because we are diving into part one of an Ask Me Anything episode to celebrate the podcast turning one, which honestly feels wild to even say out loud. I can't believe that it will be a full year of me doing the podcast. I sent out an email and invited people to ask me the kinds of questions they would ask if we were sitting down together face to face over coffee or tea. And the questions that came in were so good. They were honest and thoughtful, real life questions about things so many women struggle with, but don't always say out loud to one another. So, in this first part, we're getting into things like standing up for yourself when it didn't feel safe growing up, people pleasing, family dynamics, political differences, parenting, high functioning anxiety, survival mode, and why slowing down can feel so uncomfortable even when you know you need it. So I'm really excited to have Sophia back here joining me for this Ask Me Anything. She's going to be reading off the questions to me as I respond. Sophia, welcome back.
Thank you so much. I must have missed that email because I had a couple of questions myself, but
Oh,
maybe I'll
well,
throw them into the next batch. No problem at all. Today, I love the questions that have come in so far, and congratulations, 1 year. I feel like I can still remember us discussing the podcast and plotting it and planning it. So that's such a brilliant milestone. So congrats to you.
yeah, thank you so much. And I just want to also say thank you so much to you because you have been such a key part of this. I don't want to cry because I can feel the tears, but from just encouraging me to do this, but also just saying yes to showing up and having these conversations with me. And I love hearing from people about how much they love hearing you and I go back and forth and how much they also enjoy really getting to know you and your perspective. So thank you so much for continuing to show up and make this podcast what it is.
Well, it has been fantastic. It's been my absolute pleasure. Yeah, so this is great. I was just saying to you off air that you were one of the original guests for my podcast. So I'm really honored to be here for your journey as well. So let's dive into some of these questions.
Okay.
So we have a big one straight off the just to start.
Right.
How did you start standing up for yourself when speaking up did not feel safe growing up?
Yeah. So I will say this, like people didn't hold back. And I really love that because part of the reason I say that I became a therapist is so that I could have really deep conversations with people right away so that I didn't have to do a lot of small talk. So let's dive right in.
Let's go deep.
So I think that the first thing that I would say to this person is if speaking up did not feel safe growing up, it makes so much sense that standing up for yourself feels hard now. That's not about you being a weak person. That's about a deeply rooted patterning. And that is your nervous system. Its whole entire job is to protect you and keep you safe. And so when you struggle with that now, it's your nervous system remembering that using your voice when you were younger had consequences. And I feel like a lot of people shame themselves here. They think, well, I'm an adult now. I should be over this.
Mhm.
But as I've said on so many episodes, I'm sure your brain and your body, they cannot often distinguish between what's real or imagined, that you were 5 years old when that happened or that you're an adult now. And so, if there was a time when speaking up led to you being punished or rejected, or some sort of like anger or rage or withdrawal or being humiliated, then there is still, even if it's not a full part of you, there is some part of you that may associate speaking up for yourself with danger. So the goal is not to suddenly just become the boldest person in the room overnight. The goal is to start rebuilding safety around your voice. And I'm going to
Mm,
say go really really small here. Like it may be just admitting to yourself what you really feel before you say it out loud. It might look like practicing true, honest sentences that you want to say eventually in private, like saying them out loud to yourself in a mirror. Or it might be saying what you actually want for dinner when someone asks. Like that's a very low stakes way of starting to get comfortable using your voice. Because I do find that people who struggle to use their voice, it's like not only do they struggle to use their voice around really big things, they struggle to use their voice around small things as well. And so for this person, I think that starting really small will lead to you being able to stand up for yourself. It's not just a communication skill, it's really like a healing process that you are in. And I want to highlight process because that means that it's not going to happen overnight as you're teaching your mind and your body that speaking your truth is not automatically dangerous. That takes practice. You don't go from silence to confrontation, right? Sometimes the first step is simply not abandoning yourself internally, even if it's around really silly things like, oh, what color do you like best? What dinner do you want to eat? Where do you want to go? Those kinds of things. Over time, your outer voice starts to catch up with the inner voice as well.
mm. I love that, and 2 things came to mind immediately. One is you said low stakes, and I always whenever people tell me that they wanna maybe start putting their writing out there, which is maybe a similar sort of analogy, it's like low stakes, safe space, like
Right.
find a really safe space to do it. But the other thing, I have this friend and longtime client who has this thing about asking for what she wants. I've always really, really respected and admired her for it. And so I used to have this thing I call Ask for What You Want Wednesday because it was fun, you know? And I realized pretty quickly that the first person you have to ask for permission is yourself.
Right.
I love what you said about, maybe it just starts with asking yourself. Maybe it just starts with standing up for what you want within yourself
Yes.
before you start putting it out into the world. So I really love that.
Yes, absolutely.
Great. Let's move on to the next question. So, how do you navigate people pleasing with older men in your life, especially when they are used to you over functioning for them and do not respond well when you start setting boundaries?
Woo!
Mm.
When they're like, anyway. So this is such a real one, right? Because a lot of women are not just dealing with people pleasing. They're dealing with years, sometimes decades of being rewarded for over functioning,
Mhm.
being the one who remembers everything, who anticipates everyone's needs, who smooths everything over, who keeps the peace, makes the lunch, runs the errand, right? Absorbs the mood of the household and just like carries what other people don't want to carry. That is the role that a lot of women have been carrying for their lifetime, right?
Mm.
And then the moment that you start stepping back, it can feel like people are shocked or offended or inconvenienced or angry. And it's especially if they benefited from the version of you who was over functioning and over giving all the time.
And you say it can feel like that's happening, but sometimes that is actually what's
Yes,
happening,
that
which
is actually what's happening.
the whole thing.
Right. So when that actually happens, I think that the most important thing to remember is that someone else's reaction to your boundary does not automatically mean that your boundary is wrong. A
Mm,
lot of times, it just means that the system that you are in, and we are all in systems, we're all in relational systems. So, the system that you're in noticed that you changed. It's kind of like with a setting on like a thermostat. It's like when you turn the thermostat from what it's normally at to something else, the system then has to kick or change, or when it starts to get warmer than the temperature that you have it set at, it has to try to get it back to what it's normally used to. That's a system doing its job. The same is true for our relational systems, is that when something kicks up the temperature or lowers it or whatever that looks like, the people within the system respond in a way where they're like, no, go back to the way that the system always was. So if someone is used to you doing more than your fair share, of course, your boundary is going to feel uncomfortable for them, right?
Yeah.
And that doesn't make you unkind for setting the boundary. It just makes the boundary new. It I also think that it's really important to stop waiting for your boundary to feel comfortable to everyone else before you believe that it's worthy of enforcing it.
Mhm.
Some people will not like that you're no longer so available. Some people will say that you're selfish. They will say they might act helpless, needy, guilt inducing. And that does not mean that you are doing something wrong. It just means that you are no longer willing to play the role that they preferred. And I want to put in a caveat here. It doesn't mean that you need to become harsh or cold, but you just might have to become clearer, and you might have to sit in that moment of discomfort and be okay with that. So often, when we recognize that we've upset someone, we often want to jump really quickly to fix that. Part of your learning is going to be able to sit with the discomfort of someone else being upset or disappointed with you and not feeling the need to rescue them from the natural consequences that are happening when you set a boundary or from their own expectations, right? And that's really just a self respect thing. It's saying, no, I recognize that I've been putting your needs above my own in many ways. And now I'm taking this one small step to respect myself and say, I matter too in this. And I
Mhm.
find that that is really such a huge thing for a lot of women. And it's also a really big part of healing this.
Mhm. Yeah, definitely. I remember having this conversation with a friend of mine, and it's like, what you want is you want to set the boundary, and you also want them to be okay with it. And maybe you can't have both.
A a lot of times you cannot have both. And so you have to decide, is this boundary important enough to me that I can be okay with them being uncomfortable? Because
Mhm.
the reality is that at some point people start to learn, and especially like I was thinking about, I said people become helpless. It's like they don't know how to do something without you. Well, guess what? They learn really quickly whenever you're no longer. It's like very high achieving people who know how to do things in their everyday life become dependent on other people for doing things maybe at home. And it's like, you work a whole job. You should know how to throw the laundry in at home or something like that, right?
Absolutely. And I know this person asked about older men in your life, but like, I sometimes see it with people and their adult children as well. I have friends who have adult children who are like, just used to that dynamic, right? And it's really a dynamic that people are used to. It could be a sibling, it could just, I think those boundary settings can come in any sort of situation. But I think, this is a good specific example.
Yeah.
So yeah, like
Yeah.
that. All right, great. Another juicy one coming in. So, how do you handle political differences with family members without getting pulled into exhausting or unproductive conversations?
It's fun as I was thinking about it. Of course, right now in the world, politics is very, very heated. And so I think you have to really think about and be honest with yourself about the goal of the conversation. I will just say this up front. There are some people who will be committed to misunderstanding you. There will be some people who you know will not be able to meet you with any sort of respect or any sort of, it's not even worth having a conversation.
Mhm,
But if there are, and that would be one camp where I would just say, how do you get comfortable with saying, I'm not engaging in this, right? But then I would ask you, there are people who you might be able to have a meaningful conversation. So I want you to think about your goal. Is your goal to have a meaningful conversation, or is your goal to protect your peace, right? A
Mm.
lot of people keep entering into these conversations hoping that, okay, this time it's going to go differently. This time they're going to hear me. That I'm going to be able to say things just right. This time the other person will suddenly become curious and open and respectful and emotionally mature. And sometimes that happens. But to be honest with you, especially where our political climate is now, it doesn't happen that way. A lot of time, the conversation is not about connection or building bridges. It's about proving or provoking or performing or just unloading on either person's side. And
Mhm.
so I really think that it's okay to decide that not every conversation deserves your energy. Boundaries are allowed. You are allowed to say, I'm not having this conversation. You are allowed to redirect or leave the room, protect the relationship by refusing the topic. You know, I have people in my life who I love, and I have very different political beliefs than they do. And for some of them, we have just decided that politics is just not something that we talk about. That feels problematic in some ways to say because it just at least where politics are right now. But I have recognized that in order to preserve that relationship, it's just not something that we can talk about. And that doesn't mean that you have to be cold or combative, right? It can be as simple as we clearly see this differently. I'm not getting into politics today. I'd rather focus on enjoying our time together. And so I think the key is to say it without inviting a debate. And if someone keeps pushing you, I think that that really tells you something about them as well. It tells you that they may be more committed to being right than being in relationship with you.
Mhm.
So sometimes maturity just looks like knowing which conversations are worth having and which ones are going to just drain you, being able to discern those things, and also being able to check in with yourself around what is my goal for entering into this or not entering into this? What am I hoping to get from this? I don't know. I'd love to hear your thoughts, Sophia.
I have so many thoughts, but actually my core thought is exactly the same as yours, and it's something I spend a lot of time saying to my students all the time, like, "What are you actually trying to achieve?"
Right,
Because and it's really important to be clear about that, because the reality of it is you can't really control the other person. You can't control what they're trying to achieve, and sometimes I think I'll go a step further than you. You said you go into it hoping that this time they'll be open and curious and everything. I think sometimes we go into it hoping that they're gonna change their mind,
right. I've been
right?
there.
And the reality of it is you don't want them to change your mind.
Right,
So be careful going into it with that intention. That's the
right,
really fastest way for the things to break down,
right,
right? And so I think sometimes we have to examine our own motives because we think that we want them to be open and we want to have a meaningful discussion, and also we want to keep the peace, and also we want them to change their mind, and actually all of those things may not be true or possible in that moment
right,
or ever, right?
right,
And so it's like, be very clear about what you're trying to achieve. If it is that you're trying to protect your own peace, it may very well be that you just take it off the table. And I don't necessarily think that that is defeatist in the way that you said, it sounds a bit bad saying that, but if it is important for you in a moment to maintain a relationship,
right, right.
right? That may not always be true. But for right now, as you said, actually, this relationship is important enough to me that for now, let's just take this off the table.
Right,
Let's
right,
just take this conversation away. So I definitely agree with that. And also, I would go a step further, and I'd like to remind myself that we have more that connects us than that divides us.
Mm,
And so if a relationship is really important to me,
mhm.
I think it's as important to put something on the table when we take something off, right?
Yeah, yeah. That's good.
So, next one. I laughed when I read this one because this person talks about their kids, but I have people in my life who are not my children who I sometimes feel this way about. So, hopefully they cannot identify themselves through listening to this podcast. So the question is, how do you respond when your kids bring you problems, reject your guidance, and then turn their frustration back onto you?
Well, I first want to just say that I don't have children. I work with a lot of parents. But this doesn't just happen, like you said, in parental relationships. I do think that this is probably one of those painful parts of parenting that people don't talk about enough, right? So sometimes your kid comes to you with a problem, they want help solving it. You listen, you care, you offer what feels like wise guidance, and then suddenly you're the problem, right? Because they don't like the answer. And I know that that can feel frustrating or hurtful and a little bit disorienting because it's like, wait, you asked me, right? And so sometimes what I think is important to remember is that sometimes people, including kids, are not actually looking for solutions in that moment. Sometimes they're actually looking for space. They're looking to feel heard. They're looking to maybe just get some emotions out. And I don't want to assume, right? I mean, the person's not here, so I can't ask them more questions. But I find that slowing myself down when someone comes to me looking for a solution so that I don't move too quickly into fixing is that I ask them something like, "Okay, do you want me to actually offer you a suggestion or a solution? Or do you just need me to listen so that you can hear yourself speak and come to your own conclusion about this?" And so I think that that question can really change a lot because it can help you to stop over functioning, and what it really does is it actually puts it back on them. It helps them take more ownership. And sometimes people, when they're in a really heightened state of emotion, they're not slowing down enough to really think about, like, okay, do I actually want someone else's input? Right. And if they turn on you because they don't like what they hear, I think the work then comes in staying grounded, right? Not getting hooked into or making their emotional reaction mean that you failed. You can be loving and clear, right? You can say, "I know you don't like this, but I'm still not your enemy." Because I think that sometimes good parenting looks less like being liked in the moment and more about being a steady grounding presence. And so, just to reiterate, I think the two ways that you can do that is one, when they come to you, slow down, ask them, do you actually want my input, my opinion, my help with figuring this out? Or do you just need me to listen so you can hear yourself? If they, in fact, say that they want your solution, opinion, feedback, you give it to them and then they don't like it. The steadiness comes from when they get upset, do not make it mean anything about you. It's not about you. Right?
Mm,
It's not about you. And there's something for them to learn in that moment as well. Because the reality is that what we really want, I think for our kids especially, is we want them to be able to discern for themselves. And so I actually think it's a good thing if they're getting frustrated with your solutions and feedback in some way. Because I think the ultimate thing is, how do they recognize that maybe they need to turn a little bit more internal, because are
mhm,
they offloading responsibility and ownership onto you? Because then if things don't turn out the way that they want it to when they follow your guidance, and they can blame you instead of taking ownership for
mm,
themselves and being like, okay, no one else can make this decision for me. I have to make this decision for me, but I'm afraid to make this decision. So I'm offloading it to someone else. And now I don't like what happened. And so I'm going to get mad at that other person. It's
mhm.
an internal thing that people need to be able to work out for themselves. So I hope that that made sense. I hope that, those 2 things, staying steady in both situations, slowing things down, I think that that's how I would encourage you to move forward.
Yeah. And I would also give the caveat, I also do not have children. Um, and of course, I think it goes without saying that it also depends on the age of the child,
Oh,
but
sure. Yeah, 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 yeah.
I think it goes without saying, but I definitely agree with you. And as I said, examples of people who I can think of in the past, people who've come to me, and that's always my first question. Do you actually want my opinion?
Right.
Is that what you really want? And sometimes just me asking them that question, it does make them pause and think,
Right. Yeah.
Do I actually want your opinion?
Right.
I don't know.
Right.
I don't. Suddenly they're like, I know who I've come to. I may not like their opinion.
Right.
Mhm. And and then sometimes I give it and they don't like it and you know,
Yeah.
whatever happens next. But you're right, it's not about you. So I like that. Those are some really good sort of ways of managing it.
Right. Yes. And I will say, I know who this person is. And so I know that these are adult children. Yes. But I do agree with
I
you that it depends on the age of kid. Yeah.
agree. So next question. My therapist mentioned she thinks I have what she calls high functioning anxiety. I didn't even realize what I was struggling with was anxiety. Why do you think so many women with high functioning anxiety don't realize that anxiety is actually what they're dealing with?
This is a good one because I would say, like, the majority of my clients are probably women with high functioning anxiety. And I think that that's because a lot of women do not correlate the symptoms that they're experiencing with anxiety. So when people think of anxiety, they often picture some sort of like visibly falling apart, unable to cope, frozen, panicking, spiraling in very obvious ways or these outward ways. When what I actually find with a lot of women who I would say have high functioning anxiety, it can look like being super productive, driven, capable, on top of things, prepared, helpful, high achieving, reliable. Like all these things often can look like someone has it together on the outside. But internally, there may be constant overthinking and pressure and self monitoring and restlessness and fear of dropping the ball and trouble relaxing and guilt and all of these things, right? Needing to anticipate every single move. And so a lot of women are praised for these patterns. They're
Mm,
praised for these patterns, and that is what part of what makes high functioning anxiety so sneaky is that the very behaviors that are kind of like draining you internally are often the ones that people compliment the most. You're so organized, you're so dependable, you're always amazing under pressure, you get it done all the time.
mm,
So instead of questioning whether or not there's actually something going on underneath the surface that isn't healthy, you start leaning more deeply into those qualities and those characteristics, and you don't even recognize that it's anxiety because it doesn't look like the anxiety that you have seen on TV or right or maybe somebody in your life is anxious. Or a lot of women have been conditioned to normalize stress. Oh, it's just being an adult. It's just being a mom, being a business owner. This is just being somebody who really cares, who's committed. But
mhm,
caring and chronic internal pressure are not the same thing.
mm,
So sometimes the biggest shift happens when a woman realizes, like, oh, this isn't just who I am. This is my system and what my system learned to do in order to feel safe or valuable or in control. Right. Taking a step back and taking a look at all those things that people praise you for and asking yourself, what is the real impact of all of those things on your life? So I just think it's a very sneaky thing. So the fact that you didn't even realize that you were struggling with anxiety, it's because culture has normalized that for a lot of women.
yeah, and I definitely think I agree with what you say about what you imagine it looks like, and I think, a lot of people imagine it looks like not being able to cope,
Yes.
when actually, it for some people, they're coping extremely well, and it is that coping which is actually manifesting itself in the anxiety, so I do definitely agree with that. Great stuff. Let's move on to the next question. So how do you know when your drive is healthy versus coming from survival mode?
This feels like such a good segue from the last one because there's such a fine line. And I think one of the biggest differences is how it feels in your body.
Mm,
So, healthy drive can still feel intense and it can still feel like you're being ambitious and that it's stretching you in some ways, but it usually has steady, less up and down kind of energy to it. I think healthy drive can feel like there's a choice in it. Like you have a choice in it. There's room in it. There's a sense that you're moving towards something because you want to. not because something terrible will happen if you do not do the thing.
Mhm.
Survival mode feels different. It often feels urgent and tight and pressured and compulsive and very hard to turn off. And it's usually fueled by fear more than desire. Fear of falling behind or disappointing people, losing your relevance, not being enough, or like not being safe if you stop. So the survival mode you might look productive on the outside, but internally it can feel like you are always being chased by something invisible. And so one question that I want to leave you with is, and I think that this can be really revealing, is this: if you slowed down, what do you think would happen? If the answer is something like, I would feel lazy, I would feel something bad might happen, I would feel worthless or behind or out of control, or like everything would fall apart, there's a good chance that your drive is tied to survival.
Mhm.
But if it's like, well, it just might not happen when I wanted it to, or it'll still get done, right? Whenever it's not from that space of pressure and urgency, then it's more a healthy drive. And another
Mm,
sign is whether your drive leaves room for your humanity. Healthy drive leaves room for resting, for enjoying something outside of whatever it is that you feel like you constantly have to be working on. It leaves room for you to be imperfect. And survival mode drive usually cannot leave room for us to be humans. Survival mode drive asks us to be robots. And I
mm,
don't think that the goal is to stop being driven. I think it's to understand what's driving that. Is it rooted in your vision, your purpose, desire, or is it improving and protecting? And I think that that's why I said it's a fine line, but when you really stop and slow down and ask yourself some questions, I think it can help you figure that out.
mm. I love that question of what would happen if I slow down because I agree with you. It's definitely a fine line, and I often think healthy drive in my mind is it's kind of almost associated with possibility, like what could be possible if I did this thing.
Mhm.
Survival mode is like something bad will happen if I don't do this thing. So it's almost like the difference between, like you said, what will happen if you slow down or stop versus what becomes possible if you continue while leaving room for your humanity, etc. So I think that's a really great way to discern.
Absolutely.
Speaking of slowing down, our last question of the episode, although there's obviously this, as you said, another part to come. But for today, why does slowing down feel so uncomfortable for me?
As someone who just came back from a silent retreat, who was forced to
Mm,
slow down, be quiet. No, slowing down can feel so unsafe and so uncomfortable for people when you are constantly doing, producing, helping, fixing, planning, scrolling, solving, staying in some sort of motion. You don't have to sit with yourself. You don't have to feel everything that is kind of like this current underneath all of the movement. So when you slow down and things get quiet, it can feel so uncomfortable.
mm,
And it's not because you're doing something wrong, but it's because that stillness starts to really bring you in contact with all of the things that the constant moving and doing was helping you avoid. So it can bring up a lot of anxiety, or it can bring up sadness and emptiness or guilt or restlessness. I think a lot of high achieving people have built an identity around being the one who handles everything, who keeps going, gets it all done. If this is who you have learned yourself to be, slowing down can feel like a threat to your identity. And this episode will come out after our talk on identity. But if you
mhm,
haven't listened to our talk on identity, go back and listen to that because I do think that being busy, that has become one of the number one identities of so many people in the Western world. Like, being busy means that you are important. It means that
you're
you're
productive.
productive, you're valuable. So that's why slowing down feels uncomfortable. And sometimes I think it's not about just forcing yourself to rest, right? Sometimes I think it's just about how do you spend, maybe you're just constantly in go mode, and how do you spend 1 hour a week where you're just not doing anything? Again, it goes back to what I always say. How do you slowly and incrementally start to help yourself feel more comfortable with the thing that feels like, if I did that, everything would fall apart? Well, if you slow down and you allow yourself an hour, your whole life is probably not going to fall apart. And I think you need to train and teach your nervous system that.
Yeah, definitely agree with that. I love this. You've got such an amazing audience, such great questions. Really enjoyed that. Looking forward to the next episode with some more questions. And maybe I'll add one or two of mine to the list as well.
Would love that. You can ask me any questions all the time. Thank you so much for hanging out with us for part one of this Ask Me Anything episode. I hope that something in today's conversation helped you feel a little more seen, a little less alone, and gave you some language for something you may have been carrying but didn't even realize it. And if you were listening today and found yourself recognizing some deeper patterns in your own life, whether it's around people pleasing, anxiety, boundaries, survival mode, or repeating dynamics that are hard to break, I want you to know that these patterns are not random. If something is repeating in your life, it's rooted. And so they often make much more sense once we understand the root. And that is a huge part of why I care so much about subconscious work and hypnotherapy, because it's one thing to understand a pattern intellectually, it's another thing to actually shift it at the level where it was formed. And if that's something that you're wanting support with, you can head to shiftyourstorypodcast.com or click the link in the show notes to book a connection call or message me on Facebook or Instagram. I would love to connect with you and talk about how I might be able to support you. And come back for part two, because in the next episode, I'm answering more personal questions about my journey, my business, hypnotherapy, what I believe now that I didn't believe years ago, and more of the behind the scenes side of my world and my work. We're sending you so much love and gratitude. Until next time. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much for joining us today for this episode of the Shift Your Story, Change Your Life podcast. If today's conversation sparked something in you, I'd love to hear about it. Feel free to send me a message on social media. I'm at the Allie Rose on both Facebook and Instagram. And if you want to be coached on a future episode or explore what it would look like to work with me one-on-one, head over to shiftyourstorypodcast.com. And if you never want to miss an episode, make sure to subscribe and leave a rating and review. It helps more people find this work. Until next time, keep shifting, keep growing, and most importantly, I want you to remember that your story isn't set in stone. You always have the power to shift it.